what are we doing in the black community? The number one consumer of a Mercedes-Benz
It's us.
us. The number one consumer of a Gucci and a Louis Vuitton, us. And they don't even advertise. Why is it that in the black community, we are always the number one consumer, but we're not the number one creators?
So you just said it, the fact that there's consumers and creators. For so long, we assume success based on consumption.
You're tuned in to another episode of Closing the Gap Podcast, the truth about black wealth. And you finding us today on V94.9 on your FM dial. Also, you can go back and watch us on YouTube at Closing the Gap, the truth. Also, you can find us anywhere that you stream your podcast, Apple, Spotify, wherever that may be. Look us up, Closing the Gap Podcast. Listen to us, refer us to a friend, and subscribe to it, and set your alert button that every time that we upload that you will get the alert on your phone and be notified that another episode of Closing the Gap Podcast, the truth about black wealth, has aired. We're coming today with this episode of these last $2. We're trying to survive the struggle. And you know, when you think about it, when life has you down to your last $2, your bills are piling up, whether that's in your personal life or entrepreneurship, wherever that may be, we believe that faith in God won't let you give up. That if you continue to trust in God, even though you're wondering how ends will meet, you never want to lose your soul in the process of caring for yourself. And when you get down to your last, you don't want to do some things that are compromising. You know, you want to make sure that you have good morals, good values, and follow a guideline, a pathway forward, a good plan. And so we welcome you to this episode of Closing the Gap Podcast, the truth about black wealth, where we talk about where faith meets finances in real world situations. Mr. Wilbert Hamilton here is our main host, and he is the owner of Hamilton Wealth Advisors. And we always want to make sure that we let you know that as we are talking about finances, we are not just talking about them just for our own sake, but this is what you professionally do. So we want to recommend you to set an appointment, a consultation, if you have not already, with Hamilton Wealth Advisors, and let Mr. Hamilton get you on the right path, the pathway in which God has planned for you to take care of your finances and to manage your last $2.
Pathway to freedom.
Pathway to freedom.
What I call it. His last $2. I'm not going to lose. Last $2.
Yeah,
Well, keep going so I don't have the blue.
Yeah.
His last $2. So, you know, I think it's great that you kind of, you know, live with it. And I think it's important, you know, for people to know and understand it. And the catch, I'm always listening for the message inside the message. And, you know, that passion, that purpose that you talked about, that, you know, go keep you going.
That's right.
You know, because obviously entrepreneurship is hard. You know, life is hard. You know, building for the future is hard. You know, so that, you know, somebody told me one time ago, says, go ahead and pick your heart, because it's going to be hard one way or another. You might well pick your heart, you know, because if you don't pick your heart, life is going to pick it for you.
Yeah.
So you might as well pick your heart, so at least you head in the direction that you chose to go. But, you know, making sure, like you said, that you're having those conversations with God to make sure that you're heading the direction that He wants you to go, because that's the direction you're going to be the most successful.
Yeah.
So I always tell people, you know, don't forget to have that conversation, you know, with the Lord, to make sure that, you know, you're pushing forward with His will, because in those times of need, you know, when you're down to the last $2, you know, that's when He shows up and shows out.
Yeah.
You know, His greatest works are done in times of despair. You know, we when we're comfortable and the money's flowing and, you know, everything's good, you know, we tend to forget about God in those times. And, you know, it's not till we're down to the last $2 that we spend a little bit more time on our knees, you know, calling to Him, saying, Lord, I need you to show up and show out. And thankfully He does.
Yeah.
But we just want to remember that in all times, good and bad, to make sure that we count it all joy and continue to move forward. And as long as you're operating in your passion, in your purpose, He will bless you if you operate in that, because we are far too many people that are falling, you know, simply because they were chasing their dream and not God's dream for them. So we always want to remind you to make sure that you keep Christ first in all that you do, because there are far too many people that have made mistakes, not because they're necessarily bad people, but because they were in a compromised financial position and they made a bad decision that can cost you a lifetime. So we always want to, you know, let you know that, Christ is first and foremost in all that we do and all that you should be doing and all you should be thinking about, whether it's business, family, finances. It all goes together and all works together, but it all stems from the Lord. So we want to make sure that you keep him first and foremost. And as we dive into this episode today, and then I'm going to ask you, are you hustling or you building the business? Because you can't do both. If you're hustling, you're not building. And if you're building, that means you're not hustling. You graduated past that. So we want to make sure that we continue to help educate, enlighten, and hopefully uplift our community to help close the gap, here, in our nation.
That's right. That's right. So with that in mind, it's hustling and building. We're talking about surviving the struggle, these last $2. And a lot of time when we're hustling, we know that the hustle mentality sometimes gets us in a point where we don't take the time to reflect on where we really are.
Absolutely.
And that's what can get us down to our last. Sometimes. Now, we're not saying that, working is hustling to a degree, like continue to grind hard, continue to build, continue to work hard, like hustling in that way. But when we talk about hustling versus building, what we're talking about is don't just keep a first step mentality as you're going. Right? That, yes, you had to hustle up to get to the point that you are in, but once you get there, now you need to take a step back and take a clear look at where you are. And I think that sometimes the hustle mentality is what gets us stuck to where we don't keep a clear view of where we are.
Absolutely.
And that's where we'll end up getting down to our last $2 because we don't take the time to take a clear look at our finances and where we are.
Well, absolutely. I mean, doing that requires some accountability. And that's one thing that I've learned that, a lot of us fight. We fight that accountability. We count that person that can provide constructive criticism. None of us like to be criticized.
Yeah.
We've all been criticized before when you were a child and your parents are chastising you about something but they're on you for the right reasons. They're trying to help you not make certain mistakes. And as we get older, we all want to get to a point where, man, I don't want anybody to tell me what to do anymore. I don't want anybody chastising me or criticizing me, but I don't care where you are in life. All of us need help.
That's right.
All of us need some constructive criticism. There are always things that we can all do better. I had to look myself in the mirror from a business perspective and, make sure to say, what, am I doing all that I can do and put myself in the best situation to be successful? Am I listening to the financial professionals around me? Am I listening to the CPA? Am I listening to my tax strategists? Am I listening to my business managers and people that are going to help me develop and grow? They say, Wilbur, you want to go from being, located in 2 or 3 cities to being located in the entire Southeast region and nationally. Well, we got to make some changes. We got to make some adjustments. We need to do certain things, and they have to hold me accountable. So I think getting comfortable with criticism is something that can for all of us, can help us. It can only benefit you. And of course, when you're doing it with a servant's heart, if you got the right mindset and making sure you surround yourself with the right kind of people that have a similar mindset that are going to tell you what's in your best interest. Now, they're not going to tell you what you want to hear, going to tell you what you need to hear. Not having those yes men so-called around you, just, leading you in the right direction, thinking, that everything is going to always be good because, being an entrepreneur and being successful at anything is not always comfortable.
Yeah.
It's every day is not a good day, but, the goal is to have more good days than bad days. And yet I won't complain, so I always want to make sure that, our listeners understand that, there's no straight path to success. There's no straight line, it's going to get you to the desired destination. There's going to be some bumps in the road, some left turns, some right turns, some detours. There's going to be, some roads that are out of service, and you're going to have to, take an alternative route. So I always want to make sure that just we're understanding and listening and hearing and seeking that professional help, because seeking that professional help is what's going to keep us moving in the right direction from a professional standpoint. So when we're taking a look at those finances and, for the business and for ourselves, and we're saying, okay, well, what adjustments do I need to make? When am I at the point where I can scale and get another office? When am I at the point financially when I can add another, executive assistant or add a receptionist or add another advisor to the team? Well, if I'm not crunching the numbers, if I'm not having those conversations with my accountant, with the tax strategist, what's my business manager, seeing what areas of my business are suffering or what areas of my business could be doing better. Well, that's all accountability. because I can only do so much. So I'm going to have to trust somebody else to provide me the feedback. And then it's my responsibility to go and implement that feedback into my practice to try and grow to be successful. So, we're always going to have, struggles. We're all going to, feel like when you're on this path to success, like you're going to feel like you're down to your last $2. But as long as you're working your plan and you're trusting in God, one thing I know about God is once he gives you a vision, he's going to bring it to pass. You don't know when, don't know where, don't know how. But as long as you're trusting in him and you're seeking counsel and seeking wisdom and asking God for wisdom and a spirit of discernment to make sure that you're moving in the right direction, he's going to bless you. Even when you make mistakes, he'll still bless those mistakes. And so every mistake is not a mistake. It still can be a blessing and still be a pathway forward because he can turn anything around. I've made many mistakes in business and life, and God has used those mistakes as learning lessons on what not to do. And I think it's so important for our entrepreneurs and business owners to understand by having accountability and people around you and someone that can tell you what not to do is just important. I think, in my opinion, more important than knowing what to do, because most of us know what we like, but most of us don't know what we don't need. And it's what we don't need that gets us in trouble more than what we like. And what I mean by that is, everybody has a gift and a passion and a talent and something that you know how to do, something that people are coming to you for. Like, I know people are coming to you to get a haircut. I know people are coming to you for counsel because that's where your areas where you're gifted in. Well, areas that you may not be gifted in is, okay, well, how do you build the business within the barbershop? How do you build a church body or an organization or the financial structure? These are areas that are outside of my gift in certain situations. So now let me get the help so I can put those two together so I can now grow to a more successful place and create consistency. And I think that's where we struggle, in our lives is when, we have success one day, 1 month, 2 months, a quarter, and all of a sudden we see drop off the next. That's because we're not measuring our success. We're not tracking it. We don't have those accountability partners and those checks and balances in place.
Yeah, that's good. Taking that clear look, backing up, viewing ourselves, because scripture tells us, Lord said, my people perish for a lack of knowledge.
Absolutely.
So most of the time we get down to our last $2, we get down to our struggle, not because of what we already know, but like you said, it's what we don't know that ends up getting us caught up and getting us in a trap, and we end up getting in a struggle. So it's wise to seek out good counsel. It's wise to seek out a good spiritual counsel as well. It's good to have a good financial counsel. That's why we come on here, as Wilbur just said, like, people seek me out for spiritual counseling, not because I'm so wise, but because that's what God has called me to do. That's the anointing that he has put on me, is to preach, teach, lead, and guide his people back to him for who they need to be in relationship with God. Also with Wilbur, his gifting of what God has called him to do is to help guide and lead God's people in their finances, that they can take care of God's kingdom while also taking care of themselves and their families. All right, that's where we are. And so that step one of what we're talking about in surviving the struggle is taking a clear look at your finances, and then doing that, like you said, it's accountability. You have to take the look in the mirror at yourself. You have to really be honest with yourself and say, okay, look, I know how to do this, but these are the things that I don't know. And you don't know what you don't know until you realize you need to know them.
Absolutely.
And I want to tell everybody that's why we are here, is to encourage you to, hey, don't beat yourself up because you've gotten into a struggling situation, because you're down to your last $2, so to speak, right? But take the time, sit back, take a clear look, pray and ask God, what am I missing right now? And I guarantee you that God will show you where you need to go and what you need to do, or God will show you who you need to go and see.
Absolutely.
And what type of advice you need to seek. Many times where I made a mistake in my life is not having mentors, so to speak, and not having, and not seeking out knowledge. Being, I would say, just too brash in what I already knew, right? And thinking that I knew enough to be able to get done the things that I need to get done. And as a result, I got down to some last $2 moments, right? Using personal credit cards to start the barbershop, right? And then having to struggle to get those things paid off. And like you said, God will provide and take care of you in the midst of your mistakes. So we want to let you all know, we're not just telling you something that sounds good, but we're telling you this from true life experience, personal experiences of what we've had. We've been at that moment where we've been down. We've been at that moment where we've been in struggle. And even now, while things are good, there are still moments of struggle where where things get tight, and then we're like, okay, wait, let me back up. Now, based on the previous experiences we've had, now we're able to pull back and say, hey, all right, I experienced that back in 2018 or whatever the case may be. And now, okay, now what did I learn from that?
Absolutely.
Right, now, how can I move my way forward? So for me, it's looking at my business expenses, it's taking care of my income and revenue figures. It's biggest thing for me is not tying up my personal expenses to the business.
Yes.
You know, the commingling is a
thin lines of
thing.
separation.
Yes. So that helped me get a clear picture for where I am. And so we want you all to do the same thing. If you're an entrepreneur or if you're striving to be an entrepreneur and you found yourself in a rut, in a tight, take the time, come see Mr. Hamilton, and then also come and see me, and we can pray and we can seek God out to get you out of that rut too, because not only do you need a financial plan, but you need a spiritual plan.
Absolutely.
Right? And oftentimes we don't have the spiritual plan that we need in consulting God about what we're facing in order to get out of the situations that we are in.
Well, I can tell you first and foremost, if you don't have a spiritual plan, the financial plan ain't gonna never work. Because the devil's gonna eat that away. You know, he comes to kill, steal, and destroy. If you don't have God on your side and you're not connected to him and listening to him, then you listen to somebody else. And that person that you're listening to, you know, like I said, is coming to kill, steal, and destroy. So they're gonna lead you to destruction. They may give you, you know, the devil can bless you with, you know, worldly possessions. He can bless you with, you know, things that, you know, that entice and perpetuate your sin. You know, so I'm always a firm believer in telling people, you got to die daily to that sin. Because everybody has struggles. Everybody, you know, has issues and has, you know, troubles in their life. And, you know, we're all imperfect people. So we all have, there's constant battles that you have to go through to continue to develop yourself, strengthen yourself. And as long as you're talking to the Lord and got that good spiritual counsel on your side, then, of course, I believe you can come out, you know, pristine and beautiful on the way through. So, you know, you have to be purified.
Yeah.
You got to go through the fire. There ain't no way around it. You got to walk on them hot coals, so to speak. So, no, I'm a firm believer in having, like I said, that accountability and making sure you're examining your finances. And, you know, one thing I've struggled with, I can say personally, is I happen to work in an area where it's not a lot of people that look like me. So there's not haven't found a lot of mentors. Okay. So for the people out there that are, you know, I want to speak to that, you know, don't know where to go for help. Where they feel like, well, you know, I don't have a mentor. I'm looking to enter into an industry that I don't know a lot of people that, you know, I can turn to for help in that industry. Well, you know, but you still need some guidance, because I'm a firm believer that the Bible has the answer to every question you got.
Yeah.
So for me, when I didn't know any other African-American, you know, financial advisors, when I started in my career field, and I said, okay, I wanted to be a wealth advisor, and I wanted to be able to build a wealth management firm. And I looked around, I didn't see anybody that looked like me in that particular industry that I could touch and have, you know, conversations with. I said, well, who can I turn to? Well, I said, well, I can always turn to the Lord, and he'll guide my path, and he'll order my steps. So for me, if you don't see someone that is actually in your area, turn to God, because what I know is that God will turn you and place people in your life that can provide the insight and expertise that you need for where you are. Now, that doesn't mean that those people are going to be there forever. Sometimes people are seasonal, but we all need seasonal people to help get us to the next season. And God will provide seasonal people in the middle of your situation to help you get to the next season. So, you know, don't, worry, don't fret if you don't find somebody that looks like you doing what you do. Reach out to somebody who doesn't look like you, but just make sure they have a relationship with God, or reach out and get spiritual counseling, because you getting right with Christ and God will bring the right people to you when you need them. We'll see you back here after the break.
Welcome back to Closing the Gap Podcast, Truth About Black Wealth. I am your co-host, Mr. Eddie Richardson, here with our host and owner of Hamilton Wealth Advisors, Mr. Wilbert Hamilton. And you're tuned back in on WATV V94.9 on your FM dial. And also you see us on YouTube and catch us anywhere that you stream your audio podcasts on Apple or Spotify or whatever means that you get those podcasts. You can find us at Closing the Gap, The Truth. We're coming back today with this show is these last $2, surviving the struggle. And we want to just remind you that, look, when you're down to the last $2, when you're in the midst of the struggle, what we're talking about in the last $2 is those $2 represent a moment of decision, right? Do I panic or do I find my purpose? Do I see scarcity or do I see possibility? Right, that's what these $2 represent. That on one side, I can say, hey, I'm done. I lose everything. I give up. Or I can see the opportunity to go and to take the time to learn something new, to take the time to find a pathway forward, to ask God to lead me and guide me into what I need to do. Right, and as I talk about that last $2, I know we reference Johnny Taylor, you know what I'm saying, in song. You know, one going for the jukebox, you know what I'm saying, to hear some blues, and the other one going for the bus fare, you know what I'm saying, to get back home, right? And so that's the thing with those last $2 in that song. The lady had clear-cut determination of what she was going to do. She had blown all her money at the casino, but now she determined that, hey, as a result of this, I'm not about to lose these last two. Mm-hmm. I put a plan together with those last $2. That's what she did. She had a clear-cut plan with those last $2 that was going to get her back to square one, to where she could go back and possibly get the rest of the money that she needed to move forward. So where are you in this situation? And if you're not in that situation, then good. But oftentimes we do find ourselves in that place in our personal lives and in our business lives. And we were talking about earlier, Wilbert, about, commingling funds and how when I started barbershop, I used personal credit card to get things started. Absolutely. And doing that. So if you could kind of talk to us about the need to be able to have our personal credit, which helps us with our business credit, and how to structure those things financially, keep them separate.
I mean, it's extremely important. And I think we've all been there, especially from a business owner standpoint. We've commingled assets and commingled funds, and you rob Peter to pay Paul, so to speak, and you pull the money off the credit card personally to pay, the business rent, or the pay for an employee or pay for someone. Then we call it, you do what you got to do so you can do what you want to do. And unfortunately, we don't necessarily have the structure around us a lot of times to grow outside of that and grow from that. So that's what we have to, like I say, we're talking about taking that accountability and having that support system to help you grow from those things, because they create a lot of liability. When you're commingling assets and commingling funds, and it puts you in a situation where you can never actually grow an effective company, and it keeps you hustling and not building. So making sure that you have clear lines of distinction from an asset standpoint and not missing your personal bank account with your business bank account. You create some discipline first and foremost. Learning to pay yourself. That's one of the first rules of business when you start is, you want to have a budget, and you got your expenses and you got your income, and you kind of know what's coming in and know what's going out. And that way, you know how much you can pay yourself. You know if you can give yourself a raise or not, but if you're not keeping track of your finances, you're not keeping the budget, you're not tracking the income and expenses, how do you even know when you can pay yourself more, when you can give yourself more? You don't. You're just guessing. So if you're guessing, that means that you can never be effectively growing, because if you knew how much you were growing by, you may decide to put that money into something that would be more beneficial, like another employee that could generate a greater revenue stream. But because a lot of us are not tracking that income versus those expenses. And because we're commingling assets, because we're taking money from the business account to go shopping with personally, and that same money may have went to and paid for another employee to generate more revenue. So instead of going shopping and you spending $2,500, maybe that $2,500, if you'd have put that into another employee, would have generated $7,500. Now you still can go shop for $2,500 and still have $5,000 left because you actually are tracking your income versus your expenses. You're tracking your production level. You're tracking, your business viability. You're doing, profit and loss statements. You have a balance sheet. These are things and terminology in our community that's not talked about enough. These are things that are not done enough. I cannot tell you how many times I've talked to a business owner who's up and running and generating revenue, and they don't have a profit or loss statement. They don't have a balance sheet. They don't know what an income statement looks like. And I can speak to from experience because I was there. I was that business owner, and when I first started in business, that would just operate. We were just surviving. We were just surviving. And even when I started thriving, like you say, hustling, I still didn't have it all together because I was kind of piecemealing it, and I was just kind of going based off of what I knew. I wasn't taking the time to stop and say, hold on, God is not the author of confusion. I have confusion because I don't have God where he needs to be, and I haven't created a pecking order. I don't have the right professionals around me that can give me the proper guidance. So once I took a step back and I decided to get my life right with Christ, and he started to bring those other professionals around me, all of a sudden the business started getting in order too. All of a sudden, the discipline and structure that was coming into my personal life, it started to seep over into my business life. And all of a sudden, okay, you have a CPA and it's on the wheel. You got to get your books and records in order. You got to reconcile this. You have to do that. You need a profit and loss statement. I didn't realize it when I went to go open up my new office that I was opening in Atlanta at the time. And the landlord said, hey, I need your last 2 years profit and loss statements and balance sheet. I was luckily in the position where I had sat down with someone who had helped me have my books and records together. So now I was able to get a new office space and continue to grow and build. But if I wouldn't have had those documents and those financials together, then guess what? I wouldn't have been able to actually move into that particular office space. So I would have been delaying my growth because I didn't have it together. So having it together is essential for growth. It's also essential for protection. A lot of times we don't realize that, if you're in business, and we live in a very sue-happy environment nowadays. A lot of people want to sue for any little reason. You step on their toe, they suing you. You talk to their kid wrong, well, they suing you. Whatever the situation may be, people are very sue-happy in this economy, and a lot of money-hungry attorneys, a lot of what we call ambulance chasers, out there. So, people are always looking to find a way to get over and get a quick dollar. So from a business owner standpoint, you have to know how to protect yourself. Making sure you're not commingling funds. So if you're in the event of you get sued by someone, said you did something malicious or you did bad business in some way, shape, form, or fashion, and all of a sudden that attorney is trying to come after you and they're going to be requesting your financials and they want to see your last, 2 years bank statements or whatever it may be, and you have to provide this documentation to the court system. Once that attorney sees, oh man, you've been commingling your business and personal assets. Now, everything is on the table from a lawsuit perspective. Yeah. They were just going after your business. But guess what? You opened up Pandora's box and gave them access into the other side of the equation. Now they're going to come after all that you have because most people think that a LLC simply protects them and the protection stops there. And that's not always true. So having the proper business structure in place and making sure you have, the right kind of trust, and do you have holding companies, and do you have, multiple LLCs? Are you protecting yourself from a financial standpoint and from financial ruin? And, we see it happen all the time with these companies and wonder how, just say our president in chief right now has gone bankrupt, over and over and over again. Well, a lot of times we don't understand the game within the game. See, there's personal credit and then there's business credit. See, if I bankrupt my business and my business is totally separate from my personal, and I'm not using my personal credit to run my business, I'm using business credit. I'm using this business EIN. Well, guess what? If I bankrupt this side, that doesn't touch my personal side necessarily. So why can Donald Trump continue to go back and get loan after loan after loan? Well, his personal credit score is probably at 800. He's not using his personal assets. He's going under a business name. So once this business bankrupts, now he dissolves that, and guess what? He starts up the next day. another business, going back to the bank with still a perfect 800 credit score because he's not commingling personal and business. So these are things that are important to understand because we're going on that business credit report. It's not coming to showing up on the personal credit report if you've done it correctly, if it's truly separate, if it's not in your social security number, being in a actual tax ID, understanding what are, uncollateralized loans and, what is truly, non-committal assets and different things that can be beneficial in so many different ways. These are conversations that are not being had in our community, but it's not because people don't want to have the conversations. I want to have these kind of conversations all day, every day, but the community has to want to have the conversation with you because guess what? We have to start seeking that information. Asking ye shall find. We got to go start asking. When I wanted to get myself together and grow as an individual, I had to go talk to a spiritual counselor and say, hey, look, I want to develop my relationship with Christ. How can I do that? And I was being taught and I was able to gather more information. I was shown what to read. I was shown what to listen to. I was able to put more good in so more good would come out. But if we're not getting good put in, how can good ever come out? So we have to understand these same things that benefit us from a personal standpoint are the same things that are going to allow us to be successful from a business standpoint. So understanding how to make sure we have a budget, books and records, making sure we track and have that accountability, making sure you got QuickBooks, making sure you have some way, some sort of accountability to actually just see what's going on with your finances. And on top of that, making sure that your business structure organization is together because unfortunately, I've seen far too many of our businesses suffer because of poor structure. It's not because of innovation. It's not because of intellect. It's not because of actual service. But what happens is a lot of times, if you don't have your structure in your house in order, and all of a sudden you have some success starting out the gate because you've been gifted in a certain area. Now, a lot of people here, you've been gifted, right? So that means now you're going to get an influx of business based on your gift. Now, with that overflow, do you have the right structure in place to help you handle that overflow? And if you don't have that structure in order, you can't handle that overflow. What is the first thing that's going to lack? It's going to be service. So now all of a sudden, your quality in your service is not on par, not because you're not just as good as you was before when they decided to come to you, but because you don't have the structure and the time to take care of everyone the same way. So making sure you have your house in order structurally is essential to allowing you to be able to grow. That's why it's so important to have those finances in order. So when you can hire additional help. When you can get a bigger space, because if you have an influx of orders per se, if we're talking about a restaurant, for example, you went from serving, 100 people a week to now you have an influx of 500 people a week. And now that's grown to 1,000 people a week. Now that's great. When are you supposed to get a new place to be able to support that? When do you add new cooks? What are the quality, concerns that you need to have? What is the chef recommendations? What kind of standards do you have in order to know, okay, is this person qualified to be hired to work in my restaurant? So everybody, the most successful businesses, you can look at Chick-fil-A, for example, they have a process. And I don't care what Chick-fil-A you go to anywhere in the country, thank you, but you have a nice day. It's always going to be what you're, greeted with upon your dismissal from their restaurant. It's always a please and a thank you and a yes, sir, and a no, sir, and a yes, ma'am, and a no, ma'am. Those things are essential. So having that structure and organization will allow you to be able to continue to grow and thrive. Now you can receive the benefit of the blessing God has for you. But when we don't plan and prepare for what's to come, it's impossible for us to maintain it and keep it. So that's why you see so many businesses in our communities that are here today and gone tomorrow. Not because they were not skillful in their works, not because, they were not providing good service and they didn't want to do a good job, but simply because they didn't plan, they didn't prepare, they weren't structured enough to make sure that they could handle the blessings that was coming upon. The Lord has always told you, I'm going to open up a window and pour you out a blessing you ain't got room enough to receive. So if I'm knowing that he going to pour me out blessings that I ain't got room enough to receive, I need to do everything in my power while I can to prepare myself for what's to come so I can best handle it. And he gonna take care of the rest. He gonna bring the people that you need when you need them to be able to maintain that standard. But you got to be doing your part, and that's where we fail, and that's where we lack, because we don't like that constructive criticism. We don't want to hear, you know what, Wilbur, maybe you could be doing this a little bit better. Hey, Ed, maybe you want to take a look at this and maybe change up how you're doing that. None of us like to be chastised or told we're not doing something as good as it could be, especially when we feel like it's an area that we're gifted in.
Yeah. And I like what you said right there, Will. Then we end up going lacking, right? But if we structure things the correct way, then and put God first in all that we do, then we'll realize that God will never allow us to lack, right? Because He's going to supply all of our needs through His riches and glory, right? And like you said, He promised He would, you honor Him and give Him what you are supposed to give first and foremost. Then we will open up the windows of heaven and pour you out a blessing that you don't have room enough to receive. But oftentimes, because we have commingled our personal with our business, and now we're in that struggle and we're down to the last $2, we don't want to let go and let God have His way. We don't want to bless God with anything that we have because we think that we don't have enough to take care of God, right? And so as I think about that too, what came to mind was the story that Jesus told in the book of Luke about the rich man and the widow, and the 2 mites that the widow gave, that she cast out of her all that she had living unto God, because that displayed the amount of trust that she had. Whereas the rich man gave out of his abundance. He wasn't in the struggle, but the widow was in the struggle. She only had 2 mites, but she realized where her help came from. And so she was willing to sacrifice it all to God to get what she needed. And so what I bring that up to say that when we find ourselves in the midst of a struggle, in the midst of having the last $2 down to our last and not knowing which way to go forward, we need to cast all of our cares upon God. We need to surrender all that we are to God, to allow God to lead and guide us. Because what happens is when we constantly try to figure everything out on our own, then all we do is continually dig ourselves into a deeper ditch, dig ourselves into a deeper hole, to the point that we have to struggle and scrape and try to hustle our way out. But what we have to understand is, no matter how hard you try to hustle your way to the top, you cannot do it without God being on your side, nor can you do it without having a clear-cut plan, nor can you do it without having good advisors around you, right? The story of the King Rehoboam comes to mind, that after his father died, and his father had advisors that were still alive, that advised him of how to rule the people. Rehoboam went to his father's advisors and said, "Hey, my father has died. How should I rule the people?" And they said, "Hey, show them some love, be compassionate to them, and then they will do whatever you want them to do." Then he went and got advice from his friends who had never been in any leadership positions, didn't know and understand the voice or the pulse of the people. And they told him, say, "Hey, rule them with the iron fist, be strong on them." And I'm paraphrasing, all right? So I don't want any of my Bible readers to come back at me. I'm paraphrasing just for the sake of this time right now. They told him, "Hey, make it harder on them. Make them serve hard." And as a result of him listening to the friend who didn't have any experience in this, who had never been advisors, who didn't have the pulse of the people and didn't know where they were, he listened to them instead of listening to his father's advisors. Then as a result, he ended up losing the kingdom, right? Because he couldn't keep the people. And so that's what happens to us a lot of times, is we listen to the wrong advice. We take advice from people that don't know anything, have not been in our shoes, have not been called to do what we do. And so we have to make sure that as we move forward, that we surround ourselves with good counsel, and that we make great decisions, like the things that you have already given to the people today. Make sure you align your business affairs correctly. keep your personal affairs aligned correctly, get the right tax advisors and CPAs around, get QuickBooks or learn how to utilize Excel spreadsheets or Google Sheets so that you can manage all your finances and keep track of what you're doing. And what we want you to do in that and realize is that once you do that, then you'll move away from the hustle, away from the struggle, and you will be able to build a business that'll be able to sustain not only you, but also the upcoming generation. And we'll be back and see you after this commercial. Welcome back to Closing the Gap Podcast, Truth About Black Wealth. I am your co-host, Mr. Eddie Richardson, here with our host and owner of Hamilton Wealth Advisors, Mr. Wilbur Hamilton. And you are tuned in to us on the FM dial, WATV 94.9, also on YouTube and anywhere that you get your audio streaming, whether that's Apple, Spotify, or wherever you may do it, you can find us at Closing the Gap, the truth, the podcast that tells you the truth about black wealth. And we were just talking about the separation, the commingling of business and personal finances, and making sure that we have all of those things separate, making sure that people are able to have good counsel and to manage your finances and have some type of tools by which you manage it so that you can build not only for yourself, to go away from the struggle, to move away from just hustling and be able to build solid foundations and build a business that will not only sustain you, but that will be sustainable for the upcoming generation.
Absolutely.
So therefore, that leads us into a succession plan, right? That most times, if you take the time to educate yourself in a particular area and you have particular gifts that God has blessed you with, most times your children have some of that same gifting, right? And if you have allowed your children to be around you in the work that you do, then they will also be able to pick up on what it is that you do, right? Now, that does not mean that they are going to follow it to the T. Correct. Like I just shared on before a commercial about King Rehoboam. He did not follow the leadership and guidance and the example that his father set. But his father did set a good example.
Yes.
His father did leave him with an inheritance and a kingdom to rule. His father did leave him with advisors that tried to advise him to do what was right. So that wasn't on the father.
Correct.
The father did all the work that the father was supposed to do, but the child just did not follow through. And so, but with us, as parents, we need to just make sure that we set up the succession plan and move forward in doing things in the right way. And this past week, we in sports, we see some of that in sports, right? And in life, period, right? I'll say sports right now because just recently we had the NFL draft, and then we had the dust up with LeBron and Stephen A. Smith in reference to LeBron's son and how LeBron got his son drafted into the league. And so we see that succession plan that happened there, right, in the sports world. We also can go to LeVar Ball. You know, we can go to Steph Curry and his father, right? We can go to Joe Jackson.
Absolutely.
You know, we can go to Mr. Williams and Serena and Venus, right? We can look at all of these various stories and see a succession plan that happens there. But I know the Shadua, the Deion story, and all the comments on this past week are really on the people. So let's talk about that a little bit.
You know, I'm a firm believer in that. Of course, a good tree bears fruit. And both of those men, you know, LeBron and Deion Sanders situation, and they both have good fruit coming from their trees. So obviously both of their sons, they put themselves in position to be successful moving forward. You know, the fathers have laid, you know, the blueprint and laid a foundation for both of them being having fathers that are, you know, you could arguably say are the best at whatever they did in their particular professions. Or at the top of, you know, of those positions in their professions, you know, Deion being, you know, arguably the greatest, you know, cornerback ever, LeBron being arguably, you know, based on preference, greatest basketball player. ever. So they've done what they were supposed to do. I was just not too long ago, Deion just signed a contract extension at the University of Colorado for like $54 million. LeBron signed a contract extension, I want to say a year ago, for another, $100 million. So they've both done what they were supposed to do as far as putting their kids in position. But, what bothers me sometimes is when I see our reaction to our people in our community, because a lot of times I feel like we don't understand succession planning. And we see it happening all too often when we lose Big Mama's house, when we don't have, when I meet with people and, unfortunately, I hear too many people in our community say, when I ask them what are their plans for, leaving a legacy and, passing on the inheritance to their children, they say, well, my kids, I want them to struggle like me. Well, why? The goal is to put the next generation at a better position so they can do more than what we did. The goal is for my sons to be better than me, not to be as good or worse. So if I want them to be better than me, then I want to start them off ahead of where I started.
Yeah.
I don't want them to go through the same struggles, but I think unfortunately, we have a lot of psychological damage and trauma in our communities where, we talked about it before when we always say, I want my kids to get it out the mud. I had to get it out the mud. And in reality, nobody truly gets it out the mud. Everybody gets some help. Everybody gets an opportunity somewhere to move forward in life, whether it was an opportunity to go to college to get a scholarship, an opportunity to get drafted, an opportunity to get a job. Everybody gets some help. Now, how much help? Obviously, yes, that has changed. And LeBron and Deion have put their children in positions where they can hopefully get more help. You had people that were upset that Shedeur was going from Jackson State to Colorado, and Deion had already named his son a starter. Deion said, look, I'm bringing my luggage with me in his Louis. He told you from the beginning, and his son stood and delivered. We watched Bronny get drafted, and people be all up in arms in their feelings saying, wow, man, he don't deserve this, he don't deserve that. And I saw far too many people in our community talking about what a kid doesn't deserve. Well, he's taking an opportunity from someone else, where his father has done everything he could for himself, and also he's made a league, billions and billions of dollars, and put himself in position to where if he can control the pathway to success for his son, well, how many of us wouldn't have done that? If I could give my son a job where he was going to make $8 million in 4 years and having guaranteed opportunity to do something that he was going to love, and I was going to be able to do it with him, I think most of us would have taken that opportunity for our child. It just happened to be basketball. This happens all the time. No one has ever questioned the owner for the Lakers, Jeannie Buss, who was a inheritor of the actual organization. No one talks about the George Steinbrenners who inherited the New York Yankees, or the Jim Dolans who inherited the New York Knicks. Did anyone else about to say, you know what, you ain't worked hard enough. You didn't get it out the mud. So I want you to take a step back and give that opportunity to somebody else. No, we're the only community that frowns upon someone receiving something based on the perceived lack of work. When guess what? In order to be successful in life, I don't care where you are and what you're doing, is going to require some work. So I've just come to the understanding and learning of that my kids are not going to do the same type of work that I did, just like I didn't do the same type of work that my parents did. My mother grew up in the fields in Pine Hill, Alabama. I didn't have to work the fields the way she had to work the fields. I had to go down there maybe for a summer or two and work the fields, but I learned very quickly, I don't want to be in these fields. So guess what? I left the same way she left the fields and went to college and put herself in a situation where she didn't have to go back to the field. So, it's okay, because guess what? Every generation, the type of work that's needed is going to change if you're elevating. My kids were going to have to do more mental work than what I did, based on what I'm planning and what I'm building for them, based on the succession plan that I want to have for my own business. And my 3 sons that I have, building a corporation to where now they can walk in to being CEOs of one day. Am I going to start them in the mailroom? Absolutely not. They're going to have some privilege because guess what? They're my children. But I will have a succession plan in place. I will have other advisors around them to make sure that, hey, look, I'm not going to put all the decision-making power on them. So I think we got to get out of this mindset of completely get it out the mud and understand that, guess what? If we can control and put our kids in a better situation, we need to do so, or the world will continue to show us how much disdain and dislike and disrespect they really have for us by utilizing and trying to teach us a lesson, per se, the way they did Shedeur Sanders in his draft this past weekend. There was simply nothing other than a display of me putting you in your place, so to speak. This was a, Deion, you don't have the control. You can't do what Archie Manning did for Eli Manning. Archie Manning said, my son is not going to the San Diego Chargers. He will not play for that organization. I want him going to the New York Giants. And they said that, and they meant that, and they stood on that. And guess what? The organizations acquiesced to that, and he played for the New York Giants for the entirety of his career. Well, Deion did nothing different, but guess what? He actually did less, because he never said, my son ain't going to go here. He just says, guess what? I have intimate knowledge of these teams because of my relationships in the NFL, and there are certain situations I would prefer my son to be in. But he never told any team he would not go there. But for some reason, we needed to be taught a lesson. And I can easily say Deion was far superior in his craft than Archie Manning was in his craft. When you talk about their careers as NFL players, Deion Sanders made the NFL a whole lot more money than Archie Manning did. But somehow, Shedeur Sanders needed to be put in his place and needed to be taught a lesson. And I saw far too many people, in my opinion, in our community that said, well, he didn't earn this or he didn't deserve that. The same way they said, well, Bronny didn't deserve this or didn't deserve that. Life has never been about who deserves what. Life has always been about privilege and opportunities. So until we get the mindset of understanding, it's my responsibility to bear good fruit and to give a inheritance and leave an inheritance to my children's children, we will continue to be in situations where we're bickering and fighting over things that are unnecessary and don't contribute to growth and positive change. We're fighting about who deserves what. They're laughing at us about who's getting what. You know, we're playing two different ball games here. And we have to understand that, guess what? You better create a succession plan for your kids if you want to ensure success. Because guess what? The only way we actually close the wealth gap is to have a plan and a succession plan and a generational wealth plan that actually leaves something to the next generation so they can have a head start. We got to leave something. We got to start leaving trust and wills and not bills. Far too often, we don't have anything in place. People are passing away that have businesses, and the business doesn't have a succession plan. So if something happens to you, what happens to the clients and the people that have been patronizing your business and supporting your business for the last 10, 15, 20, 30 years? We have to have something in place, because guess what? Those people that have supported you more than likely would support your kids or whoever you would have deemed to take in charge of your organization. They've grown to a point, they've grown with you. So they want to see you be more successful. But if you don't have a succession plan in place, and all of a sudden, all the work that you've done for the last 10, 20, 30 years, all of a sudden leaves when you leave. The benefits and the values. We want to be able to control our assets from the grave. That's what succession planning gives you. Being able to control those assets, that's what a trust gives you. You can have your business controlled by a trust or entity. I can lay out, and I have laid out the instructions for my organization that will live way past me. I've already laid it out where if something were to happen to me, this is who takes over the business. This is who continues to run the business. My wife still will receive benefits and financial support from the business, because I want the business to outlive me. The goal is not for me to outlive the business. We need businesses to now start outliving our community, because that's what real wealth is. That's how we close the wealth gap. You know, we've talked about it on numerous occasions in the barbershop and different places about why we need to hang on to corporations and organizations to see them grow. You know, we need the McDonald's of the Black community. We need, you know, the Targets and the Walmarts of the Black community and the Foot Lockers, and we need the Hamilton Welfare Advisors. We need the Blueprint barbershops. We need all these things in our community to be able to sustain themselves, to be able to grow, because we need these organizations to give opportunities to the next generation. And the only way we do that is somebody got to hold on to them last $2.
Yeah.
So I don't lose.
That's right. That's right. Because too many times we're passing on the struggle
Absolutely.
and not passing on the succession plan. And so that's what we're talking about today is, look, pass the $2 on. Don't hold on to it yourself. Don't end up dying in the struggle. But we're coming to you each and every week with these various episodes and trying to encourage you and implore you to put a plan together, not only for yourself, but for the next generation. As you said, Proverbs says, you know, a good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children, and the wealth of the unjust is stored up for the righteous. So that's what we realize, that we're basing everything on the scripture. We're basing everything on the word of God. We're basing all of our lives and our decisions on God, because we are seeking him first, that he can direct our paths so that we don't go our own way. Because what ends up happening is when we lean to our own understanding, that's when we end up in the struggle.
Absolutely.
That's when we end up and staying in the struggle, because trouble will come, but trouble doesn't last always. That God said that, yes, in this world you will have trouble, but be encouraged because I have overcome the world. So if we continue to just put our faith in God to let him lead and guide us in these decisions that we have to make,
Absolutely.
then we'll get to where we need to go. We'll be able to do what we need to do. And then even when we see mistakes happen, we won't vilify our own people
Yes.
just because a mistake has happened. Because, hey, many of us wanted to see Shedeur drafted earlier than what he was. But all of the speculation that we have and the pontification about it, none of us really know exactly why he didn't. But we do know that the NFL has been a collusion organization.
Absolutely.
In the past. We do know that because of who Coach Sanders is, who Prime is, that there are some people that don't like his brashness, so to speak. And so also with his son, we do know all the rumors that end up getting passed around. And then people end up taking the rumors and running with them.
Absolutely.
And don't take the time to investigate and judge people for themselves. And so too many times in our own community, we do the same thing when it comes to various people and various businesses. You read one review, and because somebody gave a bad review, and we don't know that person that gave the review, nor do we know if that review was actually true, we will go off of that one or two bad reviews and then judge the whole business based off that, right?
Yeah.
I had a review one time. I don't know if I told the story on here or not. I may have, may not. But me and my wife were riding out of town one day, and we were talking about reviews on business, and she said, man, let me look up the barbershop reviews and see what Google has, right?
Okay.
And she looked it up and had a bad review, a 1-star review. And she looked up the name and looked up the face of the young man that gave the review. And I was like, it took me a minute. I was like, you know something? That guy came to the shop one day, didn't even get his hair cut that day. But something happened to where he couldn't get in the chair. We had some people and he got upset. And as a result of him being upset, he left a negative review. You know, and thank God that hasn't adversely affected my business to the point that, you know, I don't get business. But I'm sure that it has had, that somebody read that review and said, you know what, I'm not going to go, right? And so we have to be careful of being judgmental too many times when we don't know the fullness of the story.
Absolutely.
Right? Because sometimes we can cause people to end up struggling in situations just based off of what we speak about out of our mouths.
Absolutely.
Scripture says that the power of life and death is in the tongue. And many times we are struggling because of what we speak over ourselves and what we speak over our children and what we speak over a situation. And so we're coming to you on this show to tell you the truth about Black Wealth. Why? Because we want to speak truth to you. We want to speak encouragement to you. We want to give you affirmations to lift you up out of the mud, as we say, right? You want to get it out of the mud? Well, we're trying to get you out of the mud, all right? Because we've been in the mud before and somebody helped us up out of the mud, right? Wilbert helps me up out of the mud, and we're striving to help you up out of the mud to keep on pressing on the upward way and be able to go from struggling and surviving to building the kingdom of God and the kingdom in your own household in a succession plan.
See you next time.